Let's move on to the next algorithm, which is k-means clustering. K-means clustering is a versatile algorithm that can be used for any type of grouping. Let's look at a few examples of use cases. In behavioral segmentation, there are segment by purchaser, segment by activities on application, website, platform, define personas based on interest, and create profiles based on activity monitoring. When we talk about inventory categorization, we have group inventory by sales activity and group inventory by manufacturing metrics. When we talk about sensor measurements, the different activities are detect activity types in motion sensors, group images, separate audio, and identifying groups in health monitoring. When we talk about detecting bots or anomalies, there are separation of valid activity groupings from bots and group valid activity to clean up outlier detection. In addition, monitoring whether attract data point switches between groups over time can be used to detect meaningful changes in the data. To run a k-means algorithm, randomly initialize 3 points called the cluster centroids. There are 3 cluster centroids in the image shown here, as data is grouped into 3 clusters. K-means is an iterative algorithm and it involves 2 steps: cluster assignment and move centroid step. In cluster assignment, algorithm travels through data points, depending on which cluster is closer. It assigns it to the red, blue, or green cluster. In the next step, we move centroid. The algorithm calculates the average of all the points in the cluster and moves centroid to the average location. These 2 steps are repeated until there are no changes in clusters or when the specified condition is met. K is chosen randomly, or Able plot silhouette score can help you to decide it. Learning. Deep learning can be defined as a specialized form of machine learning that uses supervised, unsupervised, or semi-supervised learning to learn from data representations. It is similar to the structure and function of the human nervous system, where a complex network of interconnected computation units work in a coordinated fashion to process complex information. Deep learning is a subset of machine learning. Usually the term deep learning refers to deep artificial neural networks, and somewhat less frequently to deep reinforcement learning. Deep neural networks, or DNNs, are a set of algorithms that have set new records in accuracy for many important problems, such as image recognition and recommender systems. The DNN algorithms are arranged in layers, and they learn patterns from the patterns. DNNs are techniques that mimic the human brain. Our brain consists of around 86 billion interconnected neurons. And neurons are interconnected nerve cells in the human brain which process and transmit chemical and electrical signals. They take input and pass along outputs. Each neuron responds to certain stimuli and passes output to another neuron. A human brain can learn how to identify objects from photos. For example, the human brain uses several neurons to understand and interpret that the animal seen is a dog, with details such as fur, eyes, and tail. Each of these neurons may have a different weightage for the overall image, which depends on the importance of the feature. If all these neurons fire in the same direction, our brain tells us that we saw a dog. Furthermore, neurons also fire up to describe what type of dog it is, such as Doberman or a German Shepherd. Imagine babies who, from the time they are born, learn to recognize and distinguish between multiple objects like trees, dogs, cats, and bottles. Imagine the number of training examples of each object they must have seen to be able to easily identify them. The same goes for machine learning, and definitely for deep learning applications such as facial recognition, image recognition, speech recognition, etc. The more data you feed or teach them, the better the recognition capabilities become. Nielsen, artificial neural networks, or ANNs, can be defined as a computing system made up of a number of simple but highly interconnected processing elements that process information by their dynamic response to external inputs. An artificial neuron is a mathematical function conceived as a model of biological neurons, or a neural network. The multiple layers of training are called artificial neural networks, or ANNs. Neural networks are a set of algorithms that are modeled loosely after the human brain and designed to recognize patterns. The patterns they recognize are numerical, containing vectors, into which all real-world data must be translated, like images, sound, text, or time series. They interpret sensory data through a kind of machine perception, labeling, or clustering raw input. Each input is separately weighted, and the sum is passed through a nonlinear function known as activation function or transfer function. Neural networks help us cluster and classify. We can think of them as clustering, classification, layer on top of data you store and manage. They help to group unlabeled data according to similarities among the example inputs, and they classify data when they have a labeled dataset to train on. Neural networks can also extract features that are fed to other algorithms for cluster and classification. So, we can think of deep neural networks as components of larger machine learning applications involving algorithms for reinforcement learning, classification, and regression. A perceptron can be defined as a neural network unit, or an artificial neuron that does certain computations to detect features or business intelligence in the input data. A perceptron is a single neuron model that is a precursor to larger neural networks. It investigates how simple models of biological brains can be used to solve difficult computational tasks like predictive modeling in machine learning. The goal is to develop robust algorithms and data structures that can be used to model difficult problems. A row of neurons is called a layer, and one network can have multiple layers. The architecture of the neurons in the network is often called as network topology. Layers after the input layer are called hidden layers because they are not directly exposed to the input. The simplest network structure is to have a single neuron in the hidden layer that directly outputs the value. The final hidden layer is called the output layer, which is responsible for outputting a value or vector of values that correspond to the format required for the problem. Once configured, the neural network